You know when a game starts off like this that you're in for a good time. The PS2 had great games, Square made great games, it's a match made in heaven. But when you ask someone what game they first think of when seeing these two logos on startup, I think very few people would confidently answer by saying,
The Bouncer!
If this seizure-inducing barrage of colors, texts, and cuts didn't catch you off guard, then I'm honestly impressed. This thing literally looks like an Indian soap opera, that's how crazy it is. But don't be fooled, that was no Indian drama. That was the first cutscene you see upon starting up The Bouncer. And for me, that intro immediately hooked me. The insane editing, blaring music, and obviously Nomura's style of this made me know that I had to play this game to completion. And so that's what I did. And long story short, it kinda rules. But for the long story long, I'm gonna break down my thoughts about this jewel of a game that I just happened to stumble across. Have you ever wondered to yourself, man, what if Sora from Kingdom Hearts was a bouncer at some bar in a cyberpunk city? No? Well, that's fine because that's literally what this game is. The main character is Sion, who's not actually Sora by the way. Volt and Co all work as bouncers in this bar. But this game starts in medias res, so we jump straight into the action. Dominique, who's a friend of Sion's, is kidnapped by some ninjas working for the evil corporation Mikado, so the gang has to go and save her. And that's basically the story. I really like how the story is based on the simple save girl beat bad guy setup, since it's always easy to figure out the gist of what's happening. But also, the story has a surprising amount of depth. Take for example, the characters. Each of our main three characters have their own unique backstories and arcs that they go through. Sion trained under a martial arts master before he disappeared, leaving Sion to pick fights on the streets. Volt used to be a bodyguard for the head of the Mikado group before being framed for Mikado's murder, and Ko is working undercover for an anti-Mikado group, getting full-body tattoos to blend in on the streets. The backstories are hinted at throughout the game and told through text on load screens based on who you're playing as. All of these backstories give the characters lots of depth, which is really nice. As you make your way to save Dominique, you run into some really cool villains as well. First, Echidna, who is if Vanille and Fang from Final Fantasy XIII had a daughter. Big fan of her design. Also, she breakdances when she fights you, which rules. She's a real girl boss, too bad I had to kick her in the head over and over to beat her. Man, the ragdolls in this game are so funny. We also have Crackhead Raiden from Metal Gear, who honestly rules. I really liked his design. The full face mask reminded me of Mankind from WWE, and the clips holding his mouth shut were a nice touch. Also, the small detail of his pupils getting bigger and smaller really sells his insane personality. I was never upset seeing him pop back up again and again since his character was so eccentric and unique. And when he did meet his demise, he went out in one of the coolest ways possible, being disintegrated by the thrusters of a giant airship. Man, this game has some really sick cutscenes. Then there's Chaldea, who has a lot going on. Basically, she and Sion used to be friends before she died in an accident, but in the Mikado building, Sion finds some files that say she's still alive. There's a segment where I, the player, go through files and read about enemies that I've seen until now. But then, this happens.
Chaldea? Chaldea? It wasn't an accident. They were experimenting on humans?
Just to clarify, I edited none of that. This scene caught me more off guard than a lot of horror games have. The sudden voice line breaking the silence into the zoom in on her face was really unsettling for some reason. And then they end the flashback with a literal Indian soap opera editing technique. The scene was so surreal. And then they have the guts to do it again.
Dominique? What's this A2 project? I need a password? Damn it!
I've never seen something like this, where a game moves the camera around to simulate where the character is looking, but it was really interesting. It's unique things like this that make me really like the game and that will stick with me for a while. But back to Chaldea. She was experimented on by the Mikado group as they researched cloning. Because of this, all her cells age 10 years, making her look older, and oh yeah, she can anamorph into a Black Panther. Not sure what this has to do with cloning or the experiments, but they made Animorphs real, so they succeeded in my books. We fight her as a Black Panther a few times, which feels really cruel to be honest, not a fan of kicking a dog over and over, until she eventually shows her true self to Sion. He's really stupid though, and only finally recognizes her after beating her almost to death. This leads to what's probably my favorite scene in the whole game, so I'm just gonna let it play out.
I pity him. It is so sad.
Him?
Duragon. He's lonely. I must be by his side.
I've no need for such pathetic sympathy from a bionoid.
Bastard!
That was Duragon, the big bad final boss of the game. He was the adopted child of Mikado and took over the Mikado group after his death. He has real rich evil anime pretty boy vibes, which if you're asking what kind of vibe is that, just look at these other rich evil anime pretty boys. Duragon would fit right in there with Rufus and Ravis. But he's not just rich, evil, and pretty, he's a deep character as well. It turns out that Dominique is his sister, and he would do anything to keep her safe. In fact, he actually did so years ago when he agreed to be adopted by Mikado in order to save his dying sister. The entire reason he became part of the Mikado family was to save her. But before getting into Duragon too much, we need to understand Dominique. First things first, I love her. I mean, just look at her. Her design honestly might be my favorite thing about this entire game. Look at her oversized jacket. I would love to have that in real life. And that thingy she wears on her head, is that a bandana? I don't know, but it's awesome. I just love everything about her character design. It's definitely one of my favorites of recent times. I am pretty sad that she isn't wearing her jacket for most of the game. I'm not sure the reason they decided to change her costume after she got kidnapped, but I definitely prefer her yellow jacket. But even besides visual appearances, I was a big fan of her character as a whole. She has the little sister vibe, being both Duragon's sister and a younger friend to Sion in the gang. And with her having to be rescued, she reminded me of other characters like Yona from Nier, Yorda from Ico, and Kairi from Kingdom Hearts. Now, maybe I do just have a soft spot for characters like these, but I really like Dominique. She was like a soft light in a game that thematically feels like a mix of dark tones and bright neon, if any of that makes sense. In fact, Dominique is the entire reason I ended up playing this game. I just happened to come across her character render one day, immediately recognized her as a Nomura character, and decided that I had to play whatever game she was in. And on top of all of this, she's voiced by the same English voice actors as Lane from Lane and Mima Kirigoe from Perfect Blue, two of my favorite anime ever. I'm a big fan of Dominique's voice and character overall, but I might be a little biased. Oh yeah, and she's an android. This is revealed near the end of the game when she goes sicko mode on some robots before passing out. Turns out, Mikado saved her life by turning her into an android. Oh, and she's also the key for Duragon's giant satellite laser missile, so maybe his priorities were a little more than just keeping his sister safe. Duragon is beaten in the end and goes out in an insane way. Sion and the gang escape from the rocket, they're fighting on a moving rocket ship by the way, leaving it to crash into the evil space laser. Then they show this really cinematic shot of Duragon floating in space, which is just awesome. Alright, now let's slow things down a little bit and talk about the vibes. This game has great vibes all around. For one, I just gotta say I love how this game looks. Everyone has this very smooth texture to them that I think really encapsulates the era. I mean, it seems like a bridge between PS1 and PS2 Final Fantasies, which gives it a really interesting look and feel. Also, this game feels really soft a lot of times. For example, the characters will have these soft edges around them as if the camera is just a little bit out of focus. Or sometimes, things are actually just out of focus, making for really cool looking scenes. The cutscenes in this game are shot really well. It makes sense why the director called it a playable action movie. All the lighting in this game really spreads across the screen, giving it once again a soft feel even if the lights are bright neon. The overall hues and lighting used in this game add a lot to the feels for each different area. My personal favorite area is this huge forest on top of the Mikado building. The mix of futuristic architecture with some low poly trees was a really cool setting.
Yo, driver, drop us off over there.
Fitting in with the action movie vibe, this game doesn't take itself too seriously. Well, maybe it does, but I for sure don't. It's got early PS2 voice acting, so you know it's gonna rule. Honestly, the voice acting is pretty good all things considered. I mean, I already raved about Dominique's voice actress. Also, they got Steve Blum in here.
Oh man, please let this be a bad dream.
But with all that praise, there are still a lot of very silly lines. For example,
Stop it, Duragon.
I beat him, Dominique!
I don't care if I destroy my mind, as long as I slaughter all of you!
What was that all about? Dominique.
I'm a bouncer. I make a living putting my life on the line.
This might make some people think less of the game, but these lines only made me love it more. I was here for a fun time, not an Oscar-winning performance, so this voice acting was just icing on the cake for me. The bouncer is also just as over the top as an action movie. The whole game, you're just moving from set piece to set piece, beating up dudes until something crazy happens. And trust me, a lot of crazy stuff happens. Just look at how the plane shoots the train that we're riding on, and then, because I couldn't find a way to stop the train in time, it crashes into the train station. Or when Duragon uses the space laser to blow up the hospital that didn't take in his sister when she was dying. And then when the rocket ship that we're fighting on crashes into the giant space laser. This game has a lot of really good explosions and tons of crazy story beats that keep you on your toes. It rules. Playing this game also feels like an action movie thanks to its pacing. It bounces back and forth between action segments and cutscenes, giving a really nice balance of both. You can easily beat this game in 2 hours, which I think is a huge plus. The game does have a lot going on, but I think it says all it wanted to in this short runtime. And with the whole game being on the shorter side, almost nothing has the chance to overstay its welcome. I do say almost though. There are some big problem areas that almost kill the mood. First, there's a segment where you have to escape the train station by running through copy and paste hallways as the walls slowly close in behind you. This scene was pretty odd at first because it was one of the first and only playable segments where you're not just beating dudes up. But then, it grew really tiresome when this whole segment went on for around 5 minutes. Then, there was a segment where you're trying to escape the Mikado building. This was made very hard because every hallway looked the same, there were a bunch of fake doors, and there are no camera controls to look around. Oh yeah, you can't control the camera at all in this game, which is fine for the most part, but it was especially frustrating for this level. We also have a 5-minute long escort mission, which is bad. It's bad. I'm not a fan of escort missions in basically any game, but I can tolerate them. This segment makes sense considering the story, as Sion has to escape with Dominique. However, this scene went on for just way too long, and they threw the most boring enemies imaginable at you. Maybe I just found a way to break the game, but 2 punches and a kick permanently stunned every single one of these robots. So I went through repeated floor after repeated floor stun locking all of these robots. It sucked, easily my least favorite part of the game. I'm not too sure why these slower segments weren't shortened or cut altogether. They really slowed down the otherwise fast pacing of the game. But then again, there were only a handful of them and you were back in the action soon enough. I don't have too much to say about the music other than that it fits the game. The groovy battle music reflects the Nomura street style of the characters, and the villain gets some really evil JRPG boss themes. Like, they have some wild tracks, just listen to this. Also, the Animorph girl plays a really nice piano song. I think it's about time I talked about the Bouncer's gameplay. This game plays like a mix of a beat 'em up, a fighting game, and an arcade rail shooter, and if that sounds crazy, it's because it is. First and foremost, the game is a 3D beat 'em up, reminding me most closely to the Yakuza games. However, the combat is a lot more technical than just mashing square and triangle to get combos. In the Bouncer, you really have to pay attention to attack speeds, hitboxes, and blocking. Because of this, it really reminded me of fighting games and Tekken in particular. And oh, would you look at that, one of the directors of the Bouncer was the creator of Tekken! You can really feel the similarities as combat focuses much more around blocking and waiting for openings than flashy action game moves. I've compared the structure of this game a lot to action movies, but for a video game comparison, it's structured like a rail shooter. Games like Time Crisis, House of the Dead, Yoshi Safari. Yeah, I didn't know this existed either. But anyways, rail shooters typically have the player moving along, shooting bad guys until the next cutscene and stage. This basic structure is what the Bouncer follows. The intro cutscene happens, you fight some dudes, next cutscene happens, you fight some more dudes, and so on. This might seem bad or repetitive for some, but I honestly like the structure a lot. When I'm playing an action game, I'm usually just there to beat up dudes, so the fact that the gameplay is basically just beating up dudes rules. The game is also really cool with how it deals with having 3 characters. At the start of each fight, you get to pick who you want to play as, with the other 2 being AI teammates. They each have unique stats, moves, and their own experience levels. This was a really interesting way to tackle having multiple characters. It gave the player tons of freedom to try out different playstyles whenever, or stick with the one that they like. And what makes this especially cool in the Bouncer is that playing different characters can give you different scenes, voice lines, and even endings. The different characters give this game a lot of replayability, both in gameplay and in story. It would be really cool to see other action games do this sort of thing. It's probably a harder thing to do in bigger games or because of the story, but imagine if you could pick who you want to play as in every mission of Devil May Cry 5. That would be so sick. For the quality of the combat, it's something. Listen, I wouldn't go into this game expecting Revengeance levels of cool or Devil May Cry levels of smoking sexy style, but it's also not bad. Trust me, this game is much better than Devil May Cry 2. That game is bad. The Bouncer is not necessarily a hard action game. For the most part, I won my fights by wailing on the grunts or kicking bosses whenever they let their guard down. You can make your way through this game fine by just spamming attacks, but the bosses definitely make you block. How I ended up beating most of them was hitting them in the back and then, when they get up, hitting them again. It might not be the coolest way to win, but hey, it works. Also, it's important to know I didn't realize how to use any of my special attacks until the very final area, so maybe I would have spammed attacks less if I knew about these. And speaking of spamming attacks, I gotta say, Volt has one of the best attacks that I've ever seen. He literally just jumps on the enemy, and sometimes spamming this can completely own bosses. It's awesome. More games should let their characters belly flop on enemies. This game also has ragdoll physics for all the enemies and for you. This is, no exaggeration, my favorite part about the combat. It was always funny seeing enemies flop to the floor, and it was even funny seeing my teammates get hit into me. And even besides being funny, it gave your attacks a lot more weight to them. I'm a huge fan of ragdolls, way more action games should have them.
You could never understand the humiliation that I have gone through. The burden of having to be the best, of having to be worthy.
You think I'm gonna lose to someone who's only motivated by resentment?
Okay, so I know I said this game wasn't too hard, but I haven't talked about the final boss yet. This final fight against Duragon is extremely difficult. Fighting him, I did the same technique of blocking until I can get a hit in, but he's definitely harder than the rest. He can attack you relentlessly, and when he does hit you, he can combo you for a crazy amount of health. He can feel unfair at times, but it's the kind of janky unfair that really adds to the whole early PS2 JRPG vibe. During this boss fight, he hit me so much while I was blocking that my guard meter, which I didn't even know was a thing, was completely used up and I couldn't block anymore. This guy's no joke. And then, just when you finally beat him, he throws off his coat and goes into phase 2. With no checkpoint and your health not refilling between phases, this 2-part boss was quite the challenge. Like, it seriously took half an hour for me to beat him. But when I did, you know it felt good. I'm no stranger to hard games or bosses. I mean, I beat whatever this thing was in Kingdom Hearts 1. Fighting Duragon wasn't the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it did have me sitting up in the gamer position and popping off when I finally beat him. Looking back, I actually liked his boss fight a lot. In the end, the Bouncer's not perfect, but it's got lots of charm. And sometimes, charm is more important than being perfect. It's immediately recognizable for all the things that Square is known for, but was also just the beginning for what the new generation of their games would have in store. So keep trying, keep improving, keep taking those steps to making a masterpiece, because who knows, even if those first steps aren't perfect, maybe their funny voice acting, ragdoll physics, or bright yellow oversized jacket will eventually make someone's day. Thanks for watching.